tutorial. Okay, so I'll start with a brief introduction to Rhino. So, you know, a lot of you know how to use Rhino already, and that's great. But for those of you that don't, hopefully you do start using it, and it's increasingly becoming like the go-to 3D modeling tool. It's super powerful. You can do like automated parametric things in it, so you can make design really easy and beautiful on yourself if you learn how to do some of that parametric design stuff in Grasshopper. But it also uses something to draw the lines called NURBS, and that allows for sleek curves. So if you've used like SketchUp in the past, then you know that in SketchUp you use straight lines, and any like things you want to draw like pipes and stuff can look a little bit blocky with those straight lines. And there are more plugins for SketchUp to like reduce that, but Rhino uses math to calculate some of these curves, and it makes things look really sleek and elegant and scalable. So you know, Rhino I think is great, and if you're used to using like AutoCAD, or you'll get to learn how to use AutoCAD throughout the course of the MLA program. Rhino and AutoCAD kind of have similar interfaces, similar commands, similar use of the command line. So you can type in a command tool that you want to bring up in Rhino, same way as you do in AutoCAD. So it might be intimidating to learn at first, but just based on everything else you'll be learning and doing, you'll find that Rhino is in fact a great tool to be using for landscape architecture. Here's one of the first projects I did with Rhino. Really easy to do. You just draw these lines and extrude them, and I'll show you how to do all that in the tutorial today. And then one of the other reasons I like Rhino is that it just like looks good straight off the bat. As soon as you draw something, the materials that Rhino has built in look great. For example, the default material is plaster, and if you know Catherine Gustafson's work, you know, she often starts with like clay models before she goes into computer-based rendering. So this is like a clay model Catherine Gustafson did on the left of the Princess Diana Memorial Fountain in London, which I just had the chance to see this summer, which it's so much more beautiful in real life than it is in any picture. But anyway, but Rhino lets you create models with the effect of, you know, some of Catherine Gustafson's clay model work to trial out some landscapes before you fully commit to building them. But you know, that's not just one. Rhino, you can do anything. I've seen people make like SpongeBob cartoons in Rhino, and it's like, okay, you can really create these like you can create anything. So another tutorial that I've done in the past, and if you guys have any questions about any of these, we can get to some of them today too. You know, I created these like little vignettes of mini landscapes that you can create with like a really simple tool set in Rhino. And with that, you can kind of go into more detail and create kind of more complex landscapes. And we're going to be, this landscape at the bottom was kind of, landscape model was inspired by Yorkville Park, and we're going to be building some of these elements today on the tutorial. So one of my classmates, his name is Stephen Shuttle. This is him up here. He was just graduated with me this past summer. We did a Yorkville Park redesign, and our redesign was inspired by coffee lids, because of the coffee culture, past coffee culture around Yorkville Park, and today's kind of yuppie coffee culture around Yorkville Park. So that inspired our design. So we started with coffee lids. We started sketching out those coffee lids and started layering them as forms, and started to identify programs for the different areas of the space. Then we put together this 3D model in Rhino to kind of communicate the forms and where we were having specific activities in the park. And then we brought it into Photoshop and Illustrator and different softwares to start to render some of that. So to produce these elevation models, we actually brought this into we started with Rhino and brought the elevation model into Photoshop and then just layered elements on top of that. So that's another useful tool for the Rhino modeling work you do, is you can actually use it as backdrops. And I did the same thing for our perspectives down here. So you can see kind of the Rhino model in the background, and then in the foreground, I kind of layered in textures onto the Rhino surfaces in Photoshop to create a more animated space. So maybe this inspires you, or just gives you insight into how to use your Rhino modeling for your project here. And then I just wanted to show a couple more slides. If you get into more of the deeper functionality of Rhino and into Grasshopper, you can start to do parametric designs. And as I started to learn Grasshopper, I just started learning in year 3, MLA3 in October. And then I founded my like whole thesis on Grasshopper by December. So like within a couple months, you can learn it. And the way you can start to learn it is just follow tutorials online. I wanted to do something a little bit more complex, but I started with a really simple like skyscraper tutorial in Grasshopper. So you can start to learn how to use some of the functions and get used to using, this picture of the web on the right shows you the Grasshopper functions and how they all connect to each other, but you can use that to create these like parametric designs. And another thing you can do is put environmental plugin analysis tools into Rhino Grasshopper, and that lets you model things like sun and wind and environmental conditions. And there's a whole suite of plugins that you can use, and it's all open source, so developers are constantly adding to it. So it's constantly evolving. There's amazing things you can do. And I only know how to use like 2% of Grasshopper, right? And I was able to produce like my whole thesis based off of that. And here's like a GIF that I made with like Rhino model of the city of Toronto, and then Ladybug, fixing different points for the sun, different times of day, and it shows you different shadow analysis. And because you can do environmental analysis for Toronto, you can do anywhere in the world through a simple plugin. So I measured against different cities. You can do anywhere in the world. You're not, because the online community has supported all this and continues to support all this. And then, I created these like aggregate sunlight maps for downtown Toronto. So during different times of year, you can see based on the built form of the city, how much sun different public spaces would get. So one on the left's for winter, the one on the right's for summer. Anyway, that's getting into like a deeper Rhino and Grasshopper, which we're not going to cover today. But if you don't already know it, I encourage you to learn it, because you can do these amazing things. And again, it's just a tool, and the purpose of the tool is to help you communicate your designs and advance your designs it's to help you explain why, the background and the rationale for the things you're proposing, right? And Rhino helps you ground those things in real data. And so I encourage you to do all that. Okay, so today we're going to do a brief introduction to Rhino, including the Rhino interface, and how to start drawing in Rhino. And then after that, we'll bring in a base map of Yorkville Park, which I believe this is the base map you have here, right? We're going to bring that into Rhino, and we're going to scale it, and then we're going to start tracing it. So you can draw trees and the rocks and buildings and all that. And then that should be it. If you have any questions, it's a small group. Feel free to just interrupt and ask your question, or if you're more comfortable, you can just ask it in the chat, and Nadia will probably stop me and read it out loud. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll open up Rhino, and while I'm opening it up, let me know if you have any questions.
Matt, I have one quick comment or question too.
Yeah.
Maybe at the end, I know you're going to be tracing the shapes, but say, for example, the students already traced like a plan that they did in Illustrator, they did it in Illustrator. Maybe you could show how to import that at the end, and those will already have shapes to extrude, but at the end, like if you have time.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Okay, perfect.
And then in addition to Illustrator, like you can import an AutoCAD file into Rhino. So in
Yes,
AutoCAD,
anything. Yes, yeah, like a PDF or AutoCAD, any vector base that's they already drawn in another application. And I know you're going to show more from scratch drawing geometries and stuff, but if they already created in another application, how to import that in Extrude. Just
okay,
one item would be fine.
okay, sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so let's start with a new model. We're just going to start from scratch here. So I open up Rhino, new model, and when I open up Rhino for the first time, you'll see that there are 4 viewports. And those 4 viewports are kind of confusing at first when you start to use Rhino, because you're like, what am I looking at? But as you start to draw in 3D, you'll notice how useful those 4 viewports actually are, because when you're drawing in 3D, you can get really lost easily in your drawing. You don't really know where you are. Like imagine Minecraft, if any of you have played that. So these are just like different ways to like look into your world that you're creating. And I'll show you how I cross viewports and use that later. But as I start, I tend to just start in top view first, and you can change these viewports to be whatever size you want. You can also just click like top view up here to make your full screen top view, and you can click here the 4 viewports to go back to the 4 screen mode. So let's start in top view. Now the other thing I do before I start drawing Rhino is I double check my units, because sometimes I'll use Rhino for different things, like you know, if I'm doing a drawing for like a backyard design and using wood, I'm using like inches, and so I'll change units. So just double check. Today we want to use meters or millimeters. It's kind of up to you. I'll stick to meters. And then you can also specify the grid within your, see the background, how I have a grid here. I can specify how many lines I want in a grid, because I'm using meters. I just want to show a line every basically every 10 meters, like that. Okay. If you want to change units, again, you can just go to the drop down list and change units. Okay, so good. We know we're in meters now. Now, this is going to feel a little bit mundane for those of you that already know how to use Rhino, but I just want to talk through some of the elements you use to draw. I'm going to talk about points, lines, surfaces, and poly surfaces. So in Rhino, we have points, and we can use a point to manipulate an object. You can draw lines between points. For example, for lines, you can use the command called polyline. So I'm just going to type that in, polyline. And what that helps you do is just draw like a line. And then if you can close the line by clicking on the first point you drew. So this is a line. You can use polyline for that. You can also just use the tool line, and you can imagine line just draws one line segment, polyline draws multiple line segments, and then curve. Curve is also a line, but it draws kind of curvy lines like that. So when I trace landscapes, typically, if I'm tracing buildings, I'll use like polyline, because the human landscapes have and built form mostly have like square lines and like sharp lines. But if I'm tracing like landforms or elevation lines or rivers, I'll use curves, because that just helps me be a little bit more free form. Okay, so we talked about points, lines, and you'll notice that in my line, let's draw polyline. You'll notice that in my line's made up of a series of points, right? See all the little points in there. Great. The next thing we'll talk about is surface. So I've drawn my shape now. If I want to apply a surface to that shape, and if it's a closed shape, I'll type in planar surface. Whoops. Planar surface. That creates a surface within the shape. It doesn't look like it did anything here, and that's mostly because of the view I'm in. If I right click the top view icon here and I go down, I'm looking at the wireframe view. So wireframe just shows me lines, really. It doesn't really show me the surfaces. But if I go into shaded, suddenly it'll show me my surface. And then I can also go into rendered. And rendered, what that does, it renders the materials. And if I go into orbit, you can kind of see how it's outlined there. It's rendered now in that shape. But let's for now stick on shaded, and I'll show you how to do material changes later. Okay, so we have surfaces. You can also just draw like really simple clean surfaces, like from here, just type in surface point in the command line, and you can just draw a surface like that, and it's there. So there's multiple ways you can draw surfaces. And for those of you not familiar with the command line is just basically how you type in tools into AutoCAD and Rhino, and because there's so many tools that you can bring up in the app, but the command line helps you just bring up the tool really quickly. For example, polyline, I just start typing it in, and that's so much faster than trying to figure out where polyline is in this toolbox. Okay, it's there. So not so bad, but some of these more like specific ones, they're kind of buried deep. And again, play with it, understand it on your own time, but know that if you can just learn a handful of commands, you can just type it in really quickly to bring it up right away. Okay, let's go back into my top view, delete this. Last thing I want to show you is how to draw a poly surface shape. So again, we'll start with a regular surface point. Let's just make a square, and I want to extrude this square now to be a poly surface. So let's go back into the 4-point view, because that's going to be really helpful for me. And in perspective, I'm going to show my perspective as a shaded view, so I can see that there's a surface there, and I have the shape selected, right? And this is a surface. I have it selected. I'm going to type in extrude surface. There you go. It's in my command line here, extrude surface, and I can extrude this surface to make it a 3D shape. And I can also type in how many units I want it to be extruded by. So let's say I just want it to be extruded by 10 units. I type in 10, hit enter. And then there we go. We have like an extruded box. Congratulations, guys. You know how to make a box, a cube. Great. And then now let's look at this in rendered mode. You can see I have this like perfect little box, and it's rendered in plaster, and it's really elegant. You're not done yet though. This is just the beginning. Okay, delete that. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna import our base map and start tracing. Any questions right now before I do that? Okay, great. To import a base map, it's really easy. You just have to type in picture, right? Because what are you trying to do? You're trying to pull in a picture into Rhino. So just type in picture, and it brings up this Finder view, or your Windows Explorer, whatever you have, if you're on a Mac or Windows, and you just find the picture you want. So I know that I want, let's see, let's look for it. I want a picture of Yorkville Park base map. Oh God, I'm so bad. My filing system's terrible. But I have it here on the side. I'm just going to drag it in. I found it. Open up. Okay, now just follow the command line here for prompts, right? Because the picture didn't show up. It's asking for something else first. So put that first thing in that it's asking for. It's saying select first corner of the picture. Okay, I want to put my first corner of the picture here. Okay, now it wants me to specify the other corner or length of this picture. I'm just gonna plop it in because I actually don't know how big this thing is yet. But if I knew exactly how big it is, I could just type in a number and put it into Rhino. But I'm just gonna click down and it's gonna land wherever it does. But it's not to scale, right? So I know I need to scale this. And luckily on this base map, we have a scale, and any base maps you work with should have a scale. And if they don't, try and get one. You can always find a scale by overlaying a base map onto Google Earth and finding a scale that way. But we have a scale here, and I think this reads 0 to 10 meters. Is that right? Nadia?
Yes, it's
Okay.
10 meters, yeah.
Okay, 0 to 10 meters. My eyes aren't that great, so it's blurry. Let's scale this up. Let's type in scale. Base point is this side of the scale. Oh, and you'll notice here my mouse cursor is sticky, right? It's being stuck on the grid, and I can't draw in between the grid. And that's because I have grid snap on. So on a Mac, you'll see grid snap up here. Turn that off. On a PC, you'll probably see grid snap down here somewhere. So turn that off, and then you can put a point down anywhere between the grids. We'll talk through a couple other of these at the top. Ortho means if you're drawing a line or shape, it'll be fixed orthogonally. So orthogonally meaning at 90 degrees, 0 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees. So you're going to draw like clean boxes according to the grid. And then the other one I like to use is called Gumball, and I'll show you that one in a few minutes. For now, we're back to scale. Type in scale. That first point here, this is my base point of the scale. That's 0. And then my second point, reference point, is 10. Click on that. And I just type in 10 into the system. And I hit enter. And there you go. Now my base map is to the right scale. So pretty good. And you can double check, right? You can double check by going into Google Earth and measuring distances, see what distance you get, and then coming back into Rhino, going into distance, click on one side of the park. So I typed in distance into the command line, and then I click on one side of the park. For the first distance point, second distance point is on the other side of the park. And then it's about 146 meters, which I assume is mostly right. But now that you're working with this base map, and this is something that our class found a few years ago when we did this project, is you see these like rips in the middle and the tape mark here. There's actually like a tiny little segment missing in there. I think it's where the overhang, where the pergola is. So when you're digitizing this, give a little bit more space in there and put that segment in your drawing. If you have a scroll bar, or a scroll on your mouse, and you go up and down the scroll, that helps you zoom in and out. Another thing you might want to know is when you're in perspective. So again, when you're in perspective, you zoom in and out, but right-clicking is an orbit in perspective, whereas right-clicking in top view was a pan. So that's fine. When you get into perspective, you'll get used to zooming out and orbiting wherever you want, zooming in like that. So when you're moving around, yeah, just use your mouse where possible. Another thing that might happen is if you zoom all the way in like this and you can't get out, a really important trick that I found early on when I was learning Rhino was I can use zoom in the command line. So I type in zoom, and then I have all these options for zoom, dynamic, extent, factor in. If I want to just zoom out to my entire drawing, then I just do zoom, and then see how extent here. Let's click extent, or also as a shortcut, you can just put in the letter E, because you can see E is underlined here. So that means if you put in the letter E, it's going to zoom you out to extent. So that's a great trick, zoom, extent. And that'll help orient you in your drawing. Okay, so now we have this base map, we have this scaled. So we can start drawing. Any more questions?
I think it's good.
Okay, great. And you guys took a trip to Yorkville Park, right? You guys went there and you visited. And
Yes, we did,
familiar with
yes.
the lay of the land. Yeah, like when we went there, the first thing that like struck me were these like pine trees, white pine trees, and these like hard concrete planters, and that's very like striking because you don't see that very many places. So let's start by drawing that. So this is really easy. I just zoom in here, and all I do is type in circle. And then when I have circle, it's asking me a bunch of prompts. I'm just going to use the default prompt, which is select center of circle, which is here. I'm going to draw the planter first, and then I'll draw the tree. So I click down for center of circle, and I can put down the radius, which is the second line of the circle. And you know, you can draw it kind of wherever you want. I'm going to draw it right in the middle of these two lines that I see here. And I have a circle. I'm going to type pipe in now. And what pipe's going to do is it's going to specify a radius around the circle that I drew, and it's going to pipe that that circle. So I'll show you. You'll get it what it looks like after I click down. I'm going to specify the radius of the pipe to be 0.3 meters. Enter. Point for next radius, just let's keep it at 0.3 meters, hit enter. And then there you see that now I have this like ring for my tree. So really easy. I just pipe that, right? So if I go into rendered view, I see this little ring around the tree now. Okay, while we're here, let's also talk about layering. I want to, right now I'm drawing into the default layer because you see this little blue button is highlighted. That means I'm drawing on this layer. But actually let's draw in layer 1, and let's call layer 1 planters. And let's move this drawing that I did down into planters. Okay, great. And why layering is important in Rhino is, yeah, you want to keep your drawing really organized and really clean and easy to understand. But also it's like a really good way to organize your material palette. So you can specify materials by layer. And what I mean by that is, you know, in Rhino, I spoke about how there's all these materials you can draw from. And right now I'm using the default material, which is like a plaster. But I can also put on a different material onto this layer here. And I'll keep it plaster for now, but I'll show you, I can change the color of the plaster material, and it changes color. Right. Let's change it back to white, because in your drawings, I know that Nadia likes them really clean and simple. So you know, I suggest using color in a very limited way and only to draw attention to like specific things. But overall, you're not trying to make this an exercise in color. You're trying to make this an exercise in like understanding space and volumes and layouts and arrangements. So stick with white where possible. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you how to do is if I just pan to the bottom of my base map here, you'll see that there's like an underside to the pipe, because when I piped it, it created a pipe around the whole circle. I'm actually going to use my base map to slice the pipe. So let's just type in slice or split. Yeah, split. Select cutting objects. Sorry, let's type in split again. Select cutting objects. Select objects to split. I want to split my ring. Hit enter. Select cutting objects. The base map's my cutting object. Hit enter. And then now the bottom of the ring is cut. I can just go ahead, select it and delete it. I use the delete button on my keyboard. So now we only have one side of the ring. So that keeps your model clean and you don't have stuff floating around that you don't want or need. Okay. Now that we have this planter box in, let's start drawing the trees. So it's up to you. Everyone has a unique style and design for their trees. I like to use, for deciduous trees, I like to show trees in the wintertime, and I'll just bring up my Miro board here. And then for coniferous trees, I just like to show really simple patterns for the trees. So I'll draw pine trees and spruce trees kind of like this on the left, and then I'll draw deciduous trees like these wintertime trees on the right. So let's go ahead and start drawing some of that. So I'm going to zoom in. For the deciduous trees, I'm just going to use a tool called cone. So I'm going to type it cone in, hit enter, specify base of cone. I'm going to put it right here in the middle, right? And specify end of cone. So this is now drawing my cone along the north-south, or the up-down axis. And what this is going to be is it's going to be my trunk of the tree. So I'm going to specify it. Let's say this tree is about like 5 meters. All right, that's about the height it is in the park. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating the layers of the coniferous tree with cone again. So I'm going to type in cone, hit enter, specify base of cone. I'm going to just put it here for now. Specify radius of cone. I'll just put it here. Specify height of cone. I'll just put it here, click, and then I have this space. So you can see it's slightly off center now, but if I go into top view and zoom in, I can move this cone back into the center of my tree. And this looks a little confusing now, right? Because when I was in perspective view, I was in rendered mode, but when I was in top view, I was in wireframe mode. So you just have to recall what you were in different views. Okay, here, this is where we're going to talk about the gumball. So if you notice the word gumball up here, gumball is a funny word, but I'm not sure why they call it that. But what it helps you do is it helps you manipulate your object in 3D, and it helps you control how you move or scale your object or rotate your object relative to the main axis grid in Rhino. So you don't just lose your things in 3D. So here I have this object selected, and I have this grid here in between the green arrow and the red arrow, right? I can click on that grid and I can move my object freely along the green and the red axis. If I just want to move it along the green axis, I can click on the green arrow. If I just want to move it along the red axis, I can click the red arrow and slide my mouse back and forth. Okay, let's just stick with that now. I can grab the grid, click it, drag it, and move it to the center of my object here. And let's go back into perspective. Okay, that's about in the right place. But I want to move this object up now. So I'm going to click the blue arrow and move the object up, just like that. So really simple. We have the second tier of the tree. Let's add another tier for the tree. And you can do this really easily in Rhino by holding down Alt and clicking on the blue arrow and dragging the blue arrow up. That helps me duplicate that layer. So now I have the second layer of the tree, but I also want to shrink it. So you can change the heights and the widths of this shape using the Gumball again. Again, Gumball, super useful tool. Just click down the squares on the side and drag them in to where you want them to be. Notice that I was dragging one square at a time and it like kind of freely changed the shape. If I hold down Shift while I drag the red square in, it manipulates the shape proportionately to what it is. So I can have a proportionately smaller shape instead of If I don't hold down shift, I just manipulate the width, but the green side of the width stays the same. So next thing we're going to do is hold down Alt and use the gumball to create the third layer of the tree. And then I'm going to hold down Shift and use the red square to change the width again. And now I have my tree, which is really, really simple. I'm selecting all the elements of the tree and I'm just gonna group them. So I select them all and I type in group. So now they're all together. Great. And then now that it's grouped, I can hold down Alt and I can duplicate the whole thing. See that? Sorry. Duplicate the whole thing. And then I hold down Alt and duplicate all of these. And you can just keep going and duplicate it across this entire grid. So it's really easy, and you can just keep just doing that across the whole thing. And it's pretty straightforward. There are more advanced tools you can use, like a tool called Array. And when you use the tool called Array, you can kind of manipulate the trees across this whole space. I encourage you to do that on your own. Just look up the tool Array and figure out how to do it with these trees. I think it is important to learn how to do things manually too, just so you know how much easier you have it when you learn how to do things really simple and straightforward. Okay, so those are the coniferous trees, and you can just imagine filling it up, filling your drawing up fairly easily. With that way, let's now start to draw some of the deciduous trees. And again, I'm just going to use cone 2 to draw some of the deciduous trees. Cone, enter, select base of cone. Base of cone is here. Radius of the cone, let's keep it small. Height of the cone, let's put it up to there. And now I'm just going to add a few branches. So I'm going to select the cone. I'm going to hold down Alt. And I'm going to just duplicate it by using the grid. So again, holding down Alt and acting on the gumball duplicates your object, which is really helpful. And then I can shrink it, and I want to shrink it proportionately to itself. So I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to click on the blue circle to shrink the branch. Excuse me. It's fall. I'm getting a little bit of sniffles. I'm sorry. I apologize. Okay, the next thing we can do with the gumball, which we haven't spoken about yet, is using it to rotate. So if you see these like quarter circles around the gumball, green, red, blue, if you click on one of them, you can actually rotate this object. So let's do that. And now I've rotated the object, and I want to put it into the right place relative to this tree, so that I can make sure it's looks like a tree. And again, see, this is where it's hard to work in 3D. You just don't know where this thing is going to land or fall. So if you go back into like top view, you can see, okay, this shape's base is over here. The main trunk is also over here. So when I manipulate this object, I want it to be at the base of the tree there. So we can do that. If I go into front view and I zoom in, I can see that, okay, the base of the tree and the base of my branch are here. That looks roughly right, but I'm in wireframe view, so I need to go into rendered view or shaded view, and I can see kind of where my whole shape is. And if I go into right view, I can see kind of what these shapes look like. And again, I'll go into shaded. And if I go back into my 4 views, I can see exactly where everything is. Right? So that's when the different views become helpful. But let's stay in perspective for now. And let's actually just duplicate and make one more tree branch. So I'm selecting this. Let's start from the main trunk again. I hold down Alt and I drag on the grid. I duplicate my shape and I shrink my tree branch all the way down, really, really small. And I use the green rotational tool to rotate it up. And then I'm just going to shift it over here. And I'll pan around to make sure it was put into the right place. And again, it was not. So I'll go into top view, find that, move it into the right place. Like that, go back into perspective. It's good. Okay, and you can make these trees as like complex as you want, but again, since we're just like feeling out forms, I'd make this like less complex, err on the side of like what is the simplest form you need to communicate information, especially for a thing like trees, when you're going to have so many trees in this landscape. You know, I'm not saying you should always form trees as deciduous trees without leaves. In some landscapes, you'll want to show full canopies, but just think about a canopy of a tree and how much space it's going to take up, and think about what's appropriate for you to show in that landscape. Okay, cool. So now we've done trees, we've done, let's focus on some grasses. So there's a few ways you can do grasses. You can just use cone again. But instead of cone, let's use pyramid, right? Pyramid is effectively the same thing as cone, except it has clean lines. Specify number of points. I want a 3-pointed pyramid, so let's stick to that. I can specify the width of the pyramid, the height of the pyramid, and that's it, right? So it's up to you. You can just like duplicate this by holding down Alt and just like duplicating it multiple times across this little area, and you can make a grass. That might be enough for you, but the other thing you can do is use the Gumball tool, hold down Alt, and like rotate a little bit, just so it looks more like a bunch grass. It's kind of up to what you're trying to depict, right? So I go in, poly surface. Again, when you have multiple objects or surfaces together, and you click on something that has like multiple objects layered, Rhino will ask you which poly surface you want to select or which object you want to select, and just select the one you want. Hold down Alt to kind of duplicate it how you want. If you get lost in your Rhino model, you can always click this button here, which is zoom selected, right? And that helps you zoom back into the last item you're on, or the item you have selected, so you don't get totally lost. And then you can kind of just continue manipulating this object. I'm not going to belabor this point. I'm just going to show you like how to use cones and pyramids to start forming vegetation. I'm just going to go back into Rhino and show you again this image here and how I created these bunch grasses with pyramids kind of shaped together, and then I grouped all the bunch grasses and then I multiplied them to create kind of this little garden down here. Okay, next thing I'm going to do for vegetation is show you how to make like bushes. Again, you can do this however you like. A really easy way I find to do it is just use something called sphere. Select center of sphere. There, I have spheres, and then I use the Gumball to kind of reproduce the sphere multiple times. And you can change the height and size of the sphere, and then create like these boxwood-like bushes. Right. And put them wherever you want. And again, if you want to delete the bottom side, you can use the split tool. So highlight all of these, type in split, select cutting object, which is my base map, hit enter. And I just go pan to the bottom, select the bottom sides of the spheres and delete. And then there we go. Okay, so to do that, one way I'm going to suggest to do it is use a tool called rebuild. So I'm just going to type in rebuild. And then you can specify how many points you want to put onto this object so you can manipulate it. Let's stick to 20 by 20 points right now. Hit enter. So you can see it created a more nuanced grid. And then I'm going to type in points on. And that's going to show me all these points I can then manipulate this object by. And I just start playing with it then. And this is like one manual way you can do it. And I suggest starting there, and then when you get a little bit more advanced, just like look up tutorials online, and you can do them in automated ways too. But starting with like rebuilding, I think would be really helpful. And maybe in this case, like you can also turn the gumball off, because if you use the gumball, you're gonna like fix the movement of the shape by where you are in the axis. Relative to the axes, right? So you might want to like not move things. You might want to move things more freely around. It's kind of up to you. But you also, and then if you want to turn the points off, you can just type in points off. Whoops. Points off. Enter, and the points are gone. Looks a little bit like the moon right now, but if you kind of massage the shape however you want, you'll figure it out. You can also decrease the resolution, right? Like let's do rebuild. Let's decrease it to like 10 by 10 points on. When you have decreased resolution, any movement you make has more impact on the overall shape, right? So play with the resolution when you do these things. Okay, and then points off. And it really depends on what you're trying to do, right? Because like for this drawing, it was good enough to have just like simple boxwood shapes, or maybe you just want to make it slightly more ovular, or instead of like make it like a sphere, and that's up to you. But now you know how to use, you know how to start forming some of this vegetation, and I hope that's like a helpful start. Do you think we should have a quick break now and then come back and do some of the buildings?